Today, we will be building a business profiler skill that is going to be fundamentally different from a lot of the scraper type tools or skills that you would find online. Those tend to have a much lighter workflow, and in my experience, using them doesn't lead to the outputs that you would use in a professional setting. So today, the goal for me is to build a professional grade business profiler skill. And what I will be showcasing, which you can inherit outside of just skill building, but into your regular Claude Code sessions, are what I call parallel and sequential workflow patterns. A to B, right? And that is typically a sequential approach from where you are to where you want to go. What a lot of people are not aware of is that by utilizing sub-agents, you can actually be creating parallel work streams that sit within your sequential session flow. And there are obviously a lot of benefits to that. First of all, you are able to get through your work a lot quicker because as opposed to doing tasks sequentially, what you're doing is you are breaking it out into parallel sub-agent work streams. So then if each of those tasks are not related to one another, you're able to do them all at one go by spinning up sub-agents within your session. But more importantly, what it does is that it opens up, each sub-agent opens up its own session. And what that means is that as it's going through the completion of that task, it's not eating up your context window. Which means to say that your sessions can run a lot longer before you begin to encounter things like context anxiety or context rot, right? So that's the principle around the core feature that we'll be showcasing here today when it comes to building out this business profiler skill. As usual, we start off with quite a bit of prep work already. So we will be working off the business's project file, basically building this on top of the Calibre agent. And it has access already to all of these tools linked to it, right? So you've got web search, which comes out of the box, Perplexity, which is an MCP, FileCrawl, which is a web scraper, Playwright is browser automation, Ahrefs is a third-party tool that allows for you to search or rather get site-based organic data. And then we have our Google Ads and Meta Ads API that's attached. The idea is to expose these tools so that the LLM, Claude, which is Opus 4.6, will know exactly what to call, or rather it has a toolkit to play around with. So the first step is to run an initial deep research about a specific client or a business. And the purpose here for me isn't so much to take that and then submit it, right? Because again, that doesn't have much alpha in terms of value. So instead, the main priority here is to just surface initial questions or rather initial insights about the client's business. And more importantly, surface next round questions that will then go into the layer 2 part of the research, which is the deep dive. And for us specifically, when we look at profiling businesses, we look at understanding the market and the category, the audience, the brand, so an audit of the brand, and then understanding how they're doing on the marketing front. Are they generating enough demand? Is there any innate demand in that brand and that category? And that ultimately, together, all of these pieces of information gives us a really good sense around the prospect client that we will be submitting this business profiler report to. It gives us a very good sense around their market position and what likely will be the challenges and problems that we will need to fix even before we jump into an initial call with the client. So then what happens is we have that initial deep research that produces a report. It then produces a bunch of questions, which will then trigger sub-agents to then work towards producing 4 types of reports. And in order for it to produce those reports, it needs to do research. And that's where it spins up the sub-agents. And I'm calling it n number of sub-agents because we don't know how many of them. I'm leaving it to the intelligence of the model to figure out how many sub-agents to spin up, to then use the relevant tools here. All the data is then pushed to then produce a marketing and category report. And each of those reports are then aggregated into a full report, which will then be produced in the business's colors, right, and design style. And the final step for me is I want to actually produce a scorecard, which will probably be a one-pager HTML report type, which you can easily send across to the client. So this is the overall workflow: exposing the tools, doing the initial deep research, to then go deep diving, to then producing sub-reports that then gets aggregated into a full report. Now, each of these will be a report on its own, right? From which we can then use the design.md to create HTML reports if we want to submit any of the deep dives, if we deem it valuable. But ultimately, what we'll aim to do is submit this one full report along with the scorecard. So that's the overall workflow that has been devised already. If you look at what has been built here, really, it's the pattern that we are using here is one where there is an orchestrator and it's fanning out to some sub-agents to go and do the research, and then it's going to refine and write it to then produce a report. But it's fractal in the sense where if you looked at this entire workflow, we have the main workflow that splits out into the sub-agents to then produce that report. And within this structure, you then have each of those sub-agents fanning out to its own sub-agents to then produce a report. So that's what I mean by that fractal pattern, where each of these are its own fan out, fan in pattern that is a part of the wider pattern that you're seeing. Again, this is some insights around how you can be thinking about building. And the reason why we're doing this is because imagine the number of data points that the sub-agents are looking to collect. If they were doing it sequentially, number one, you are most definitely going to blow up your context window, even if you have 1 million tokens within one session. And the other thing is obviously the time gains, right? All of this is aggregated into probably, maybe 10 minutes worth of research because it's running it in parallel as opposed to running it sequentially. So yeah, that's the architecture of what we're building today. As usual, what I tend to like to do is a lot of homework, and in that sense, we are working off VS Code today. I call it the prospect researcher, but really it's the business researcher. Basically, we've got the scoping for L1, what's the job, right? The outputs, the expected outputs, the areas to cover, and then a quality bar, right? And then we then go through the same thing in terms of what is expected from each of the sub-agents to produce. So that's the market category report, that's the audience report, that's the brand audit, that's the marketing audit that needs to happen. So these are just pieces of information that will be ingested when we build the skill, so that the skill creator knows exactly what we're trying to build and the details that goes into it, because this shows you the relationship between the different components of the details of what makes a good marketing and category report needs to be worked out and be given as a brief to the skill creator when it goes ahead to create the skill. So in general, what I'll be doing is I'll be submitting this prospect researcher spec as well as the diagram that we have here. And that will be the input for the skill creator to work on this business profiler skill. Yeah. Okay, let's kick off. Spin up the skill creator. I'm looking to create a business profiler skill. I will give you some briefing documents in a bit, but let's just spin up the skill first. Okay, so it's gone ahead to actually read the prospect researcher spec.md. It has that open. The spec is solid. And what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to screenshot this entire thing. And because we're working out of VS Code today, you can just copy and paste it. And here is some additional info on architecture of the skill. And it's also asking me for whether it should handle the assembly as well. Looks like it has enough context, so it's going to run. And let's see what it's doing, right? The diagram clarifies a few things. There's that spec left open, 2 subagents each spawn, and number of subagents for their individual research areas. Design.md governs a full report assembly, full pipelines, end-to-end, full report scorecard, all within one skill. I've confirmed the question that it had, and then web search is listed alongside perplexity as a tool. Yep. Now Scaffold is able to go ahead and write it now. Essentially what it's done is it has gone ahead to create all of the different documents from the skill.md to the L1 reference to the L2 references, etc. What I mentioned was that for the design.md, what it's doing is it's giving a very specific type of structure, right? And this is probably where you would want to tune up and down depending on and then obviously there's the scorecard spec. So I'm not so sure how it's going to be using a lot of these things, but it's probably going to be layered inside of the skill.md and how it's going to be using it. I'm going to review this bit by bit, and then I will be highlighting specific things that I would want fixed. Okay, so I mentioned that from a design.md standpoint, what we do have is the creation of HTML reports using the caliber style. Let's review the skill.md first. Okay, so we're reviewing input, then it's setting up the workspace. Okay, and it has all of the different, so this is good because what it's doing, it is making sure that there's a workspace for it to work out of, right? Initial deep research. Okay, so a few things here on the skill.md, a few things that I would maybe caveat a bit, which is there isn't any designation within the skill around what the tools are for and how to be using those tools. And what that means is that there is like, it might not actually know how to go about searching for certain things or what tools to use. So that's a concern for me. But let's have a look through audience, and yep, there is no mention of tooling, right? So it says tools available, right? But let's see if it has mentioned that you got 4 parallel subagents here. So it says may spawn its own subagent for individual research areas, right? So I need it to be a lot more prominent, right? So I'm going to give it the feedback. All right, so what I've noticed is that in the skill.md, you have not provided any instructions around tool usage. So my concern here is that we've got all these different tools and the skill doesn't know which and what to be pulling for what kind of purposes. So I think there is probably a good reason for us to place section around tools and what the tools are and how it can be used inside of the skill.md. What I want to ensure is that when it goes into the L2 level of deep diving into the different areas, the different categories, it is spawning any number of subagents it requires to use the different tools available to it to then go and furnish and create the report. So what that means is that if we are talking about marketing and there is research areas that has got 20 to 30 different questions, you would be spinning up to 20 sub-agents using the different tools to get the answer to those questions, right? All of those answers then aggregate up to the marketing audit write-up, right? So then what happens is we are using maximum levels of parallelization so that we can complete the report as soon as possible at the expense of tokens. And the other thing is when it comes to overall the report, I think we need to form an opinion around the styling of it. Let's just start off with calling it a McKinsey-style report. It can be anywhere between 10 to 15 pages long. So a healthy amount of detail is good. We don't want just a synthesis, right? We want it to be a very punchy report that the prospect client will be surprised, delighted by. And that's what the scorecard is for. The scorecard is 1 page long and it gives the summary of the findings, but the final report should be extremely detailed still, with an executive summary. Yep. So I'm giving it the feedback around what it should fix, because again, this feels a bit lean in my opinion. And a few things, like I said, the gaps was making sure that it knows how to use the tools, and then making sure it knows how to be pushing for more parallelization so that it can work quicker, and it is very thorough in terms of how it approaches its reporting. So the big bet that we have here around the utilization of each of these tools is that by giving it very clear in like what it does, when to use it, which variants of the tool to be using, the intelligence itself will be able to say, okay, for this specific question, the best way for me to get that answer is to use Perplexity. For this other question, the best way for me to do it is to go and scrape the website using Firecrawl, etc. So this is how, again, we are giving it the guardrails, and within those guardrails, relying on the intelligence to go ahead and figure out what to use when. Ultimately, when we go and test this tool, we might find that we need to be giving it more guardrails so that it's making the right moves, right? We don't want to give it too many instructions. We just want to give it some high level architectural flows and then giving it the toolkit to be successful in it. And then obviously being very specific around what the outcomes should look like, which is why we have covered things like what are the research areas that you should be thinking about, specifically what kind of output format you should be thinking about so that there's a level of consistency there. And then you would then have something like a quality bar for it to refer to, which is why when we were initially scoping out this document, getting the details in so that it has that as a reference point to then create it is necessary, in my opinion. Okay, so we've got McKinsey-style report, update design.md. Okay, cool. So finally, the last thing right now is that what it's doing is it's going to be producing a lot of these in markdown files, right? One final step for this skill that I just thought through, which is for it to invoke the Calibre HTML or slide deck creator. So those are separate skills within my workspace that it can then use to create slide decks. It can use to create HTML reports using the Calibre style. So the final step is to ask the user, once the report has been completed, whether they would want to then convert these reports into actual submittable documents, the right report creating tools. So we have one for slides, we have one for just word style documents. So ask the user which one to invoke to then convert these documents into something that can be submitted. That's the final step. Okay, it's gonna hit to edit the final step. Deliverable conversion, HTML report, branded Calibre HTML document, presentation style deck, both skip, keep as markdown. Yep. And then we have the different skills based on the user choice. Yeah. So there we have it. I'm going to go and spin this up in a separate session to test, and we will come back with some examples. Okay, I'm back with a few examples today to run through how the business profiler skill went. I had gone ahead to pick out two businesses that I thought would be interesting examples or use cases for the skill. And yeah, I ran them in the background. I haven't done any real QA or QC around the quality of these reports, so it'll be fresh eyes on my end as well. So I just gave it and nudged it towards deeper analysis given the data that's available on that platform. So the two businesses that I ran a profile on is One Plaud AI, which is a note taker tool which I recently purchased, and yeah, it's been a really good piece of technology to integrate into my stack. And the other, which is an interesting selection for a brand to analyze, is Kimi K2 0.5, or rather Moonshot AI. And the reason why this was interesting for me is because it's a global business based out of China. So finding information about a China-based business can be a bit challenging. At least I think that it could be challenging. First of all, let's take a look through the entire process that it went through. And basically, just to recap, what it does is it goes through the first round of deep research on the brand. And then what it does is it then produces an initial report and produces a bunch of deeper questions to ask. So you can see here L1questions.md. And then after that, it goes ahead to produce the layer 2, which is L2, deeper reports for market category, audience, brand, and marketing. Once all of those reports are done, it then comes together to read and produce the final report. And the one thing that I did do in preparation for this second round recording is to get it to produce the HTML report in the style of Calibre, right? The agency that I run. So, and also one last piece of the puzzle was there is a evaluation component on making sure that the HTML report is producing something that doesn't have any errors or bugs. So what it does is it again uses Playwright to open up a browser to check to see if the quality of the report that was produced is free of any bugs. Yeah, so it's passed all of the eval checks. I'm assuming that it did the same thing here. Okay, oh yes, it did, right? But it just didn't give the, oh, the browser navigation is being used. So maybe it skipped that step, but let's take a look at the report after. But yeah, look, I think it went through all of the different steps. What was interesting was that it actually spat out quite a lot of extra tool usage within the main session itself. I mean, if it produces something of quality, it's fine. Because at the end of the day, what it's supposed to do is it's supposed to launch 4 domain subagents in parallel, right? So it's doing it here. And what's supposed to happen is the subagents are supposed to run within the system itself. So yeah, I think let's take a look at the output. Like what I mentioned, there is the initial report here, which I'm going to open to the side. Questions that was generated. All right, so okay, so we've got the initial report here that does company overview. Business is based out of San Francisco. It's founded by Chinese guy who's a serial entrepreneur and launched its first product on Kickstarter in 2023 and has scaled really aggressively actually because it's worth 250 million ARR by September 2025 and it's in 170 countries. So then it goes through high level category and market insights. So this is the initial report that then produces the deeper report here. So then we can take a look at the L2 market and category report. And this is where it goes into not just the current size of the entire market, but the projections on how it's going to be growing in the next 10 years. So going from 535 million to 3.48 billion and growing at about 19%. And then you've got digital voice recorders, etc. Macro forces, category search trends. So this was something that I asked it to build. I asked it to analyze as well as a part of validating market growth numbers. So you can see that Plaud itself specifically for the US have seen organic traffic go from 39K to 349K and really spending not much of that in paid traffic, which is fantastic. And then we're seeing how it's competing in the competitive landscape where a lot of them are actually fading, Fireflies dropping, but Plaud growing significantly. So yeah, it's pretty in-depth in terms of analyzing its competitors. It's showing its product lineup and PMF, product market fit signals. So obviously when you're growing 83% year on year, you definitely have product market fit. Japan seeing 21 times sales growth in 12 months. That's substantial. And the fact that you've got Costco, Amazon, these are mainstream retailers picking up your product. All of that is really good signs that the business is in great shape. And then it also highlights things like the key risks and what it's doing right here. So that's the market category report. We will quickly glance through what the audience will look like. Basically, we've got a segment 1, which is the meeting drowning professional. We've got segment 2, which is the neurodivergent idea capture user. It's not just for meetings, but it can be used for you to walk around, capture your ideas. And then the regulated industry professional, and I think this one is where its compliance towards security is important, right? So this would be legal professionals, healthcare providers. So, yep. So those are the 3 main audience segments. We did a deep dive on the brand as well as the marketing. And I won't go through this in great detail, but you can see the report covers a significant amount of data points and analysis. And all of that culminates to the full report that you're seeing here. But for me, again, like a better way to view this very substantial report is in the HTML format, which the last step of the skill has actually gone on, which is here you have your scorecard, right? What is the current ARR? How many devices was shipped, etc. It's got really strong organic traffic and executive summary here, company overview. We've got revenue by market. So big portion of that being in the United States, Japan contributing to a large proportion of that, and then Europe being the next bit. We've got some nice graphs here to show competition, Nota.ai taking a huge dive from being the market leader. And then we've got Otter AI growing steadily, Claude obviously growing substantially. And then we then have Fireflies actually going down a pretty steep trending downwards, right? So Claude is showing really aggressive growth, which is fantastic. Audience analysis, like what was shown in deep dive, we've got the meeting drowning professional, neurodivergent, idea capture. So those should be high priority, right? And then it's also going to check out Amazon reviewers, iOS App Store reviewers, etc. And then the deep brand audit, trying to understand how it's positioning itself and then communicating that, right? Design excellence, 5 out of 5, and whether it is aligned or misaligned. So you can see the coherence of it, the fact that it claims to have design excellence, but it's also seeing the industry respond in giving it quite a lot of awards. So there's consistency on that front. So you're seeing stuff that it's doing well and stuff that it's not doing so well, which is the fact that it's trying to push premium and aspirational, but then it's constantly discounting 15 to 20%, and that's not great. You never see Apple go on 15 to 20% discounts, right? So the say do gap, what does that look like? And then overall, we're also looking at how customers are perceiving the product. Good generally across the board, but you're seeing some subscription complaints on Amazon's side of things. But then we can take a look at how they are marketing the product and brand. You can see that most of their efforts relatively is centralized in influencer and creator type ads. We've got some meta and social ads, organic search, etc. So then you also have a non-branded SEO gap that the audit, or rather the business profiler, has identified. So AI note taker only ranks number 14. We've got a competitor coming up, which is Meet Jamie, who's really capturing the gap that has been opened up by Claude. And yeah, you can see the influencer program drawing 3,700 sponsored posts with 2,500 unique creators. And then we are seeing the cross-domain insights that converge audience, brand, the market, and marketing data laid side by side, right? So this allows for you to understand tactically what you should be going after. And the brand audience tension, yep, the brand positions for executives with Escalade design, but then, and it's also not cheap, right? It's about $189, like an AirPods Pro. Oh, it's even giving some resolution around how to fix it. Yep, so here are some recommendations as well, some risks and watch outs. Interestingly, it went far enough to identify that Apple, Samsung, Google are all moving towards integrated AI recording technologies. And there's some subscription backlash, and that was stuff coming from Amazon, right? And yeah, just giving a fit around whether this client is right for us or not. So that is for Claude. Let's take a look, and I don't want this to run for too long. So let's also take a look at the business profiler that was done for Kimi K2. And where you were seeing that plot immediately, and you're seeing that a lot of the ratings were actually pretty strong, right? We're not seeing the same here for Kimi, where the market position is moderate, brand clarity is weak, content and SEO is weak, doesn't spend much on paid media at all, right? And then competitive mode, highlighting the fact that Kimi, which is well known for what they were trying to push, which is the agent swarm, it's a 6 to 12 month mode because other AI companies will probably be pushing agent swarm features as well. Okay, so again, looking through executive summary, company overview, growth trajectory, it's actually dropping from a domestic standpoint, which is interesting, right? They've raised a fair amount of money, has highlighted who is funding it. And specifically what it's done is it's categorized Kimi K2 to be inside the global AI assistant market, right? Which is projected to grow to 48 billion. So it's not LLMs in general or AI usage, but AI assistant market. And then looking at monthly active users as of February 2026. This is interesting because it doesn't show Anthropic actually. So perhaps maybe, oh yeah, Anthropic is not available in China or in the market that it's competing at. But then you're seeing the share of search on the US market showing that, you know, Gemini obviously having big. Oh, that's interesting because this is Gemini, this is Claude, but it doesn't have ChatGPT. So that's missing something here, which will probably require for us to tweak, which is why what we should be doing is reviewing a lot of these in detail. And the reason why I see why that's the case, because share of search on the US market, when we look at the tables here, the monthly volume in the US is 115 million, right? Whereas Gemini is 1.5 million, Claude is 9.4 million, right? So the difference in terms of the search volume is too different that it can't be placed on the chart. It will dwarf everything else, right? And then, yeah, we can see brand audit, which is interesting because it's also showing you how Kimi has evolved from how it's trying to push its proposition, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So it's not just one static proposition. And that tells me that they've got a bit of an, I wouldn't say identity crisis, but they're just riding with what is current and hot in terms of its development. We've got brand association map, so technical. We've got great benchmarks, but clearly the report, or rather Claudette, the agent, thinks that they haven't exploited Pink Floyd or Radiohead enough. And most importantly, there's a critical gap in terms of getting the transparency up there. So then you've got the say-do gap, marketing audit. This is pretty cool. You've got Kimi, ChatGPT, Canva, Gamma app. So that's interesting that they are comparing these players. I mean, ChatGPT obviously biggest leader, Canva in a very different territory. And then obviously the domain rating being pretty decent, but compared to the rest of the competitors, not great, and doesn't have much organic keywords, right? So it's saying that a DR78 should support 10,000 organic keywords. Kimi only has 1,005, right? So the domain authority is being wasted. We can see the trend of it. And you can see the domain rating growth, cross-domain insights again, and then strategic opportunities, risks and watch-outs, and then saying that it's a moderate to strong fit for the business. This is pretty thorough in terms of covering a whole bunch of things. And this is what you would typically get when you have a very clear definition of what you want good to look like, and as opposed to just going one layer deep in terms of generating research or borrowing someone's skill from a public repo. This gives you very unique, personalized needs in terms of what you want from a business profiler, right? These reports, which would typically take weeks to produce to get all of that information, took the agent about half an hour per report, and they were running concurrently. And that's why we ran into the issue of the graphs, right, on Playwright clashing. I don't know what happened there, but yeah, I'm really happy with the quality of the reports that I'm reading here. Obviously, a lot of these things would probably need to go through another round of checking. The sources is one of the things that I probably want to add to include in all of the reports. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed the video and you will go about building your own business profilers.